All right, hello everyone, welcome back. Hopefully you can see okay. My tripod literally just broke right before this video. So the purpose of this video, it's one last review for an EOC test, for our EOC test. Distant learners, you guys at home, y'all will be taking this test on Thursday, April 15th. I will post a document on my website that has what testing room you're supposed to go to. And you can look where you're supposed to go, what testing room, where you'll be taking your test. On that document, you'll be able to find where you're going to go. The EOC party for this Sunday has been canceled. I'll include that in the email. Just lack of interest. I think it was too short of notice and people have a lot going on Sunday. And that's okay because I'm just going to go over the questions that we would have gone over on Sunday anyway. So we're just going to go over this. So all this is a 30-question EOC test, EOC-style test that I made that will kind of summarize what you can kind of expect on the EOC. These questions are going to pick up after the Cold War. It's going to be some Cold War stuff and then onward to the modern standards. So the stuff that we started after the last case assessment and then moving forward from there. So just follow along and I'll give you some helpful hints, tips, and tricks. And hopefully this won't take too long and hopefully it won't be too boring either. If you need any help as far as EOC review or anything like that, you can email me. I'm including some study guides on my website. Also, if you want to set up a Zoom meeting, if you've got any questions in particular about anything regarding the EOC, we can set up a Zoom meeting or a phone call or anything like that, and I can hopefully clarify anything you need to know. Let me double check one more time and make sure this is looking good. I think you can see it pretty well. I'm really frustrated because my tripod broke, piece of junk. But so we're going to go over this now, and I'm just going to give you some helpful hints, tips, and tricks. Now, first of all, the very first thing you need to remember with these things, and we're going to go ahead and get started, is that you should always look at the details up here. So it says this political cartoon was published in October 1957, okay? Doesn't give you a whole lot of information, but we know 1957 is right in the midst of the Cold War, space race, all that stuff. So here we got Uncle Sam. You can tell it's him because of his face. You know, that's Uncle Sam. But also US is there. It says Russian satellite here. So there's a Russian satellite. And it says awake at last. And he's woken up from the bed of complacency. And it says the event symbolized in this cartoon, a.k.a. the Russian satellite, had what effect on the United States? Now, this question is difficult. And I've chosen all difficult questions for this test. But it's actually, if you think about it, it's going to have a clear answer. So the best answer on this one, I'm not going to read them all to you, you can read them. The best answer on this one is that schools in the United States placed a greater emphasis on science and math. Now, we never had a direct war with the Soviet Union, so that's why that one's wrong. The United States cut back its nuclear weapons program, definitely not. This is 1957, Cold War is really getting going, so our nuclear weapons are going to go up and up and up during that time. And D, the United States launched its own satellite to spy on the Soviet Union. Kind of, that's going to be your distractor answer, but our best answer, and we learned from this, JFK's programs, Eisenhower's programs, all these presidents during the Cold War placed a big emphasis on science and math. So that's going to be your answer for that one, okay? Next one. All right. It says this is an excerpt given from a speech given by JFK in October 1962. Now, what I like to do before I read anything in these documents is I make sure that I read the question first, okay? And let me make sure that you can still see the question. Yeah, it looks good. Okay, so it says, why was Kennedy forced to take action in response to the situation described in this speech? So what the speech is about is it says this government has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. What this is referring to are the missiles in Cuba, the Cuban Missile Crisis, okay? So we discovered there were missiles in Cuba, and they believe that the purposes of the bases that had the missiles are to provide a nuclear strike capability, okay? So why was President Kennedy forced to take action in response to this situation? Well, Cuba is only 90 miles away from the coast of Florida, so your best answer is going to be D. Cuba's location gave the United States very little response time if a nuclear weapon was fired. So let's take a look at the other answers and why they're wrong. The U.S. had been an ally of Cuba since the Spanish-American War. No, we weren't allies, not really. The United States wanted to avoid an influx of Cuban refugees. Maybe, but that doesn't have anything to do with nuclear weapons. The Cuban government requested help to prevent Soviet invasion of the country. No, remember the United States invaded Cuba, not the other way around. All right, it's going to be your answer there. Okay. How was the course of the Cold War changed by the Cuban Missile Crisis? Now, if you recall from one of my lectures, I told you about the Cuban Missile Crisis. They had a very intense time period of negotiations afterward for about 2 weeks. Moscow and Washington, D.C. had to talk to each other. So, and after this, they established a hotline between the two countries. They have the very famous red phone in the Oval Office. And basically, your answer is going to be efforts were made to improve communication between the U.S. and Soviet Union. Let's look at these and talk about why they're wrong. It says Cuba denounced communism and joined the United Nations. That never happened, okay? Tensions rose as the Soviet Union invaded Cuba. The Soviet Union did not invade Cuba. They were friends, okay? Or C, new trade agreements helped ease tensions between the United States and Cuba. Maybe, but that's actually not true. So that's going to be D there, all right? So efforts were made because we didn't actually end up blowing each other up. Cuba did not shoot any nuclear weapons at us, thankfully. All right, number 4, what was the United States' main goal for getting involved in the conflict in Vietnam? Now, remember, during this time, we were really worried about the domino theory in Southeast Asia. Now, the domino theory means that if one country falls to communism, the next country next to it, next door, will fall to communism, okay? So North Vietnam became communist, so we were worried about South Vietnam being communist. So your best answer is going to be B. We were worried about the North Vietnam taking over South Vietnam. So let's take a look at these. Was it A, to stop China from attacking South Vietnam? Nope, that did not happen, okay? C, to establish trade relations with Vietnam and other nations of Southeast Asia. Well, if we're getting involved in a conflict, that has nothing to do with establishing trade relations, so nope, that's not your answer. Or D, to take over South Vietnam and make it a democracy. That's actually a decent answer. It's not true, though. That's not going to be your answer. The best answer is B. And that one's just straight up facts. There's no tricks or no stimulus, nothing like that you have to take notice of. All right? What effect did the media coverage of the Tet Offensive have on the American public? Now, the Tet Offensive it was very well documented. It was shown in the media. There are a few pictures, and if you looked at the PowerPoints that I provided, there's a very famous picture of a young man. He's 17 or 18, very young man in the image, a young American, and he's been shot in the chest, and he looks just dead. He actually survived, but he looks dead. But it happened in the Tet Offensive. Also, there's a picture, it's actually a video, but in the PowerPoint, it's a picture of a guy getting shot in the head, a Viet Cong guy. So the media coverage was really disturbing of the Tet Offensive. So it's going to be D, that there was a public shift in opinion against the war. Basically, people were against the Tet. When the Tet Offensive happened, they realized this war was a losing war. America was not going to win. We were not prepared for this war because we were not set up to fight very well against guerrilla warfare. So let's take a look at this. Is it A, the number of voluntary enlistments to the military increased? No, definitely not. If anything, after this, the draft increased because people did not want to go to this war. B, more people began to purchase war bonds to support the conflict. Nope, that's World War II. C, the public seemed to be indifferent to the war. Definitely not, because there were a ton of anti-war protests about Vietnam. Okay, so your best answer is going to be D. Okay, moving right along. All right, this chart shows a sequence of events related to the Vietnam War. Okay, so here are some details from Vietnam. So Vietnam was divided on the 17th parallel by the Geneva Accords. This is kind of the beginning of the Vietnam story, okay? And then we've got the middle. Tet Offensive took place, this is 1968, okay? 1973, American forces withdrew from Vietnam. So it's asking what is the end, what happens in the end, and I will tell you, Vietnam was united under a communist government because North Vietnam took over South Vietnam. Okay, so North Vietnam wins. So that's what's going to go in this box. All right, so let's take a look at this. The policy of Vietnamization was announced. Vietnamization is actually that one, so that's not right, okay? Ho Chi Minh liberated Vietnam from the French. That actually happens up here. That was towards the beginning, so that's not your answer. Or D, the My Lai massacre occurred. That happened sometime in the middle of the war, so that's not going to be your answer either, okay? So the answer was A on that one. And I'm going fast on this because I know these going over the test is boring, but I just want to give you some highlights of information and show you some strategies. All right, détente. This is a straight up vocab question. Détente was Nixon, and Nixon visiting or talking with the Soviet Union, and the goal was to reduce tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, okay? Now, if we look at our answers that are wrong, A, to negotiate peace between the United States and Germany after World War II. No, that's not our answer. When Hitler killed himself in 1945, peace was essentially on in Germany, okay? So war was over there. C, to develop a fair trade policy with Cuba. It has nothing to do with Cuba, and also we were not interested in trading with a communist country. Or D, to create a better immigration policy for Hispanic immigrants. Détente has nothing to do with that either. Again, détente is all about this. This is literally straight up content knowledge, and it is in our study guide. Okay, so make sure you take a look at those too. All right. Why was the military draft during the Vietnam War seen as unfair? Because of all of these things, all of the above on this one, okay? So African Americans were drafted and used as ground troops mainly, which is really terrible because they had no rights at home. Basically, they're fighting for their rights, and yet they're getting killed for America. A lot of white men in college were granted deferments, meaning they didn't have to go to the draft. America looked at them and saw them as valuable to American society at home. And then C, medical exemptions were given to many white men. So Vietnam War and racism go hand in hand, unfortunately. So D, all of the above. Now, on this test, on the EOC, I will tell you, you're not going to see a whole lot of all of the above answers. If you are unsure and all of the above is the option, usually it's a pretty good option. I wouldn't automatically choose it, but if you're totally not sure, if you're just kind of up in the air and this is one of your options, it's usually an okay option. Now, I'm not saying that, and don't blame me if you miss one because you choose all of the above, but usually it's a pretty good option. Not always, but usually, okay? So let's keep rocking and rolling. What event inspired the U.S. to create NASA? All right. So when the Soviets launched Sputnik, which was the world's first satellite, America freaked out, and that's why we created NASA, okay? So that's pretty straightforward. Again, that was just straight up recall. Can you remember? Soviet development of the hydrogen bomb. No, that has nothing to do with space. The United States lost of political power after World War II. That's definitely wrong because the United States was the world leader after World War II. We were the #1 country in the world after World War II and have kind of remained that way. Or D, the United States' successful use of the Marshall Plan has nothing to do with space, has nothing to do with NASA. The satellite is what it is, so B. That one's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. Even if you didn't know, you could look at that and know, okay? Now, what this is, it says this picture was taken in November of 1989. I didn't necessarily go over this one, and I apologize, but it is in some of your notes, and it is in your study guides. But if we take a look, it's pretty straightforward. It's really, if you didn't know anything about this, this is pretty clear. Something is happening here. It looks like a wall is falling down. And so if we look at this and we see what event helped spark blah, 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 it's the fall of the Berlin Wall is what this is, okay? All right, so C, it says, what event helped spark the fall of the Soviet Union shown in this photograph? This is the fall of the Berlin Wall. It really can't be anything else. This has nothing to do with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Siege of Stalingrad, you might say that, but no, it's not it. Or the Tiananmen Square Massacre, no. This is the fall of the Berlin Wall, okay? End of the Cold War there. All right. This moves on to the 1950s, and it shows a soldier. It says this drawing depicts an American soldier returning home after World War II. You can see he's got options of school, job, business, farm down here. It says this drawing shows the effect of what situation after the war, and it's referring to this guy, this veteran, having a lot of options to succeed because of the GI Bill, okay? The GI Bill, remember, they could use it to go to college, they could use it to buy a home, they could use it just to live off of for a little bit, they could start a business, etc., etc. So let's go through these. Colleges and universities provided special scholarships for veterans. That's a pretty good answer, but it has nothing to do with the drawing, so it's not going to be that. The government provided veterans with financial bonuses when they returned. Technically, that's a pretty good answer, too, because it's similar to this, but the GI Bill is what it's wanting you to remember because it's asking about post-World War II, all right? Or D, veterans had few options after returning home from the war. That's definitely not it because you see he's got multiple options for him after the war, all right? How has the American population shifted in the years since World War II ended? So this is asking about the 1950s. And a big hallmark of the 1950s is that everybody, or a lot of people, many middle-class families, moved to the suburbs because they have automobiles, and in the 1950s, if you recall, the interstate highway system was created, okay? So now people can commute to work. All right, so that's why in the 1950s, after the war ended, people are going to move to the suburbs. So let's take a look at the wrong answers. A large portion of the population moved out of the West and Southwest. We didn't learn anything about that. It's not true. B, Americans built more unique and individualized homes. Not really, no. Or C, the wealthiest citizens were concentrated in the center of cities. No, people left the cities because of these things right here. So your answer is going to be D. And if you live anywhere, most places in Murfreesboro, you know that this is still the factor. Suburbs growing like crazy around here, okay? Rocking and rolling. This advertisement illustrates what trend in the 1950s? So these people, happy family here, and they've got a gigantic fridge and freezer, and it's full of stuff, all right? A brand new concept in luxurious living, the fabulous Foodorama. So it's just a giant fridge. So of these, what trend is symbolized? The 1950s is very similar to the 1920s. It's going to be the rise of consumer culture, all right? This has nothing to do with the policy of containment, so it's definitely not going to be that one. C, the need for income equality has nothing to do with that, and also it only shows one race in this, so it's not that one. Or D, the advantages of the standardization of culture. It really didn't have anything to do with culture at all or standardization of it, so it's not that one. So A, consumer culture. Very good, rocking and rolling. How did technology in the 1950s most impact the culture of America? Now, this is a difficult question, but if you pay attention to right here, that word is going to give you the answer. Now, I'm going to tell you it's going to be B, and here's why. It's going to tell you this right here, living, all right? Culture is the way someone lives, how you live up to something. So let's take a look at the wrong answers. So new appliances such as dishwashers prompted men to take on more domestic tasks. Dishwashers take away a domestic task, so it's not going to be that. Popular movies portrayed successful career women, causing many women to take jobs outside the home. In the 1950s, women left the workplace from World War II and tended to stay home, so that's not actually true. Affordable automobiles made it possible for many African Americans to get better jobs further from home. A decent answer, but not really, no. And it doesn't really have to do with culture there. So it's going to be B. And what it's referencing is referencing things like I Love Lucy, Leave It to Beaver, Andy Griffith's Show, things like that. These families that are, beautiful, picturesque, and people wanting to be like them. All right? When really those are totally fake. Number 15, what factor did historians believe had the greatest impact on JFK defeating Richard Nixon in the 1960 presidential election? Now, something happened in the 1950s that is an advancement in technology that was a game changer, and what I'm talking about here is TV. All right, and on TV, they had the first presidential debates in 1956 and 1960, and Kennedy did a very, very, very good job presenting himself as a great candidate. And people were obsessed with TV in the 1950s and 60s, so they definitely watched this, and Kennedy did a great job, okay? Now let's look at the wrong answers. Corrupt practices of Nixon, that's talking about Watergate. Watergate didn't happen until 1972, so that's wrong. Kennedy had great experience as the governor of Massachusetts. That's just a random thrown in answer there, so no, that's not going to be it. Or Nixon did not serve in the military during World War II. That's also not it. It's going to be this one, okay? There you go. Number 16. All right, this is a great one. I like this one here. It says, these are lyrics to a song written by Bob Dylan in '63. So don't read it yet. Read this. Dylan's lyrics are symbolic of what trend in the 1960s? Now, if we think of the 1960s, things are changing in America. We got a lot of protests going on. We got a lot of things changing. And we have the rise of something called a counterculture, something different, okay? Now, we don't really know because we haven't read the lyrics, so let's read them. It says, come mothers and fathers throughout the land and don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. There's a battle outside and it's raging. It'll soon shake your windows and rattle your walks, for times they are a-changin'. So if times are changing, and it's the 60s, well, that means something different from the 50s. So it's going to be A. It's a rebellion against the conformity culture and the status quo of the 1950s. Their parents were older, they're watching these TVs, they're trying to have the perfect family, and the kids growing up in the 60s, they're like, we don't want to be like this, we want to be something different. And Bob Dylan was the same thing. The election, so let's look at the wrong answers. B, the election of leaders who would protect American values. No, he says times are changing and American values are going to be old school, okay? C, support for the escalation of the Vietnam War and the end of communism. If you recall, in the 1960s, people hated the Vietnam War, and music especially reflected that, so no. Or D, pressure to increase the number of minority students, including women, attending colleges. That's actually a pretty good answer as far as the song goes, as far as times they are changing. But it doesn't really mention women or minorities in that, so it's going to be A. A is going to be your best answer. All right, we're killing it. Moving right along. Photograph was taken in 1969. There's a man on the moon. It says, what is one reason the United States puts such a strong emphasis on making this happen? Now, they're talking about the space race and the United States winning the space race, and we're in the space race against the Soviet Union, so it's B, all right? So B, to prove that the nation's science and technology skills were better than the Soviet Union's. So let's take a look. A, to create jobs for scientists and engineers who had gone to college in the GI Bill. That's a decent answer, but it's not right. C, to show cooperation between the United States and other industrialized nations. That has nothing to do with landing a man on the moon, so no. Or D, to build international alliances with other nations who value scientific research. That's not going to be your answer either. Sorry. There we go. So B on that one. All right, this is a good one. Good question here. All right, so you have to take a look at the photograph. It says this photograph was taken in 1957. And there are a few clues in this that I really like. So first of all, the big clue that's showing you Little Rock Central High School. If you know about Little Rock Central High School from my civil rights video, it's about the integration of Little Rock Central High School, meaning that African American students are now going into Little Rock Central High School. Now, they are clearly surrounded by soldiers, American troops, all right? So, let's take a look at our questions. It says, what idea is evidenced in this photograph? And if you know the story of Little Rock Central High School, it is that the federal government had to intervene because they had a racist governor, and the governor said these kids are not going into the school, but the federal government sent in the 101st Airborne to escort the kids into the school, and Little Rock Central High School was integrated, all right? So let's take a look at this, why the answers are wrong. The state governments had sovereignty over the federal government. Nope. The 101st Airborne came in, and they are they're the Army, the U.S. Army, so it's not just regular state troops, okay? B, private colleges were exempt from compliance. That's not a college, so no. Or C, public schools in Arkansas were a model to other states trying to implement integration peacefully. The northern states were already integrated, so that's definitely not right, all right? And also, if you're having to use troops, it's probably not a peaceful situation, okay? So let's move right along. All right, it says analyze the photograph and answer the question. Now, I'm going to tell you on this one's kind of tricky because the photograph doesn't really tell you much, except you just have to know who this man is. One of the most wonderful people who has ever lived. It says, what would the leader in this photograph most likely say? By the way, that's Martin Luther King Jr. I didn't actually say that. Martin Luther King Jr. regarding the civil rights movement. And Martin Luther King Jr. is all about nonviolent protests, peace and nonviolence, okay? So let's take a look at the wrong answers. A, the civil rights movement was a failure because no major anti-segregation legislation was passed. That's definitely wrong. We had the Civil Rights Act in 1964, the Voting Rights Act in 1965, the Fair Housing Act 1968, 24th Amendment, all kinds of different civil rights legislation was passed. So wrong. C, civil disobedience can never work. It is not an effective method to achieve political change. Definitely wrong. Civil disobedience is a direct nonviolent approach, meaning they do things like the sit-ins, the protests, and the marches. So that's wrong. D, groups like the Black Panthers are necessary to the movement because they are not afraid to use force. There's no force happening in the image, and not only that, if you know about Martin Luther King, he does not use force. He uses nonviolence and peace. All right? All right. Moving right along. Question number 20, only 10 more. Okay, so it says this is the cover of Life magazine from March 19th, 1965. Life magazine was super, super famous, super, super important. Everybody looked at it in America back in the day. So look what we have here. We have African Americans marching, and this is happening in Selma. This is where the big marches happen through the South. It says Alabama troopers await marching African Americans in Selma, and here they are here. So this is media coverage, and it says the savage season begins. So they're hinting that there would be violence and problems once this march reached its location in Montgomery. And it says, how did media coverage like this affect the civil rights movement? And basically it showed that in the South, there was violence and there were problems occurring in the movement, and it gave support to the movement because people in the North and people around the country said, why are these people in the South treating these people? They're just marching. So it gives a lot of attention and it gives a lot of support for the movement, okay? So let's take a look. A, it caused many Northerners against the cause as they saw how much trouble demonstrators were causing. In that image, they're causing no trouble whatsoever. It was the police and other racists in the South who were the ones causing the trouble. C, it resulted in numerous financial donations but little public support from the average citizen. That's a decent answer, but it's not correct because actually the average citizen saw this and they were like, yo, they're doing the right thing. They're going about it the right way. Or D, it had no effect on the movement as many people were unaware of its aims and goals. Well, clearly people were aware of the movement. It made the cover of Life magazine, so people were aware of it, okay? All right, pretty easy here, right here. This is the text of the 24th Amendment to the United States Constitution. So check it out, it's about poll tax. The 24th Amendment is all about abolishing poll taxes. It says, how does this amendment impact democracy in the United States? And it says stuff about poll tax. Now, if you know anything about poll tax or anything that has to do with tax and money, you can automatically look at your answers and see which one has to do with money, and it's going to be C. It makes voting accessible to all eligible citizens regardless of their socioeconomic status. If you see something about tax or money and you see economic, it's going to give you the answer, okay? Now let's take a look at the wrong answer. A, it promotes the use of primary elections. This has nothing to do with primary elections, and if you look at it, it doesn't have anything like that, so it's definitely wrong. B, it changes the elections of senators to a direct vote of the people. Definitely doesn't. It does talk a little bit about senators and representatives, but there's a better answer in that it involves poll taxes, okay? Or D, it ensures that women can exercise their voting rights. Doesn't have to do anything with women in this one, so your best answer is C. Okay? Cool. Moving right along. 22. Analyze the photograph and answer the question. All right, so in this photograph, it says, for what are the protesters in the picture pushing? All right, so you see, if we look at the picture, we've got a woman, a woman, a woman, a woman. It says barefoot, pregnant, marching for ERA, Equal Rights Act. All right, so ERA means equal rights. It says 1920, we got the right to vote. 1981, it's time for equal rights. So it's going to tell you pretty much the answer here. It says, for what are the protesters in the picture pushing? And let's see, it's going to be A, your answer, a proposed constitutional amendment that would guarantee equality based on gender. So this is part of the feminist movement, which is it was a pro-women's rights movement, okay? So B, potential legislation promoting gender-based affirmative action. That's a decent answer, but it's not going to be your best answer. Growing support for the women's suffrage movement. That says 1981 up here. Women's suffrage happened in 1920s. That's definitely not your answer. Or D, mandated maternity leave for women so that they can spend more time with their children. No, that's not it. They're just fighting for equal rights. All right? Equal rights for women. Okay? All right. Moving right along. It says, these political cartoons depict Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson during their presidencies. So let's avoid the cartoons for just a second. It says, based on these political cartoons, how were Roosevelt and Johnson similar? So we've seen this cartoon before. It's all about the New Deal, and these are all the New Deal programs. There's FDR, okay? And here's Johnson, and he's got the Congress. He's playing the Congress, and he's passing all these legislation, defense appropriation, anti-poverty, Southeast Asia evolution, blah, 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 okay? So how are Roosevelt and Johnson similar? This is really pretty easy. It says both men, the answer is both men use government programs to address problems in American society, okay? So let's take a look at the wrong answers. Both men focused solely on improving the economy during their presidencies. It's not true because if you looked at the Johnson one, it talks about war, all right? Both men were forced to use the military to intervene in international conflicts. Kind of true with Roosevelt talking about World War II, but as far as the cartoon goes, this is all about the New Deal, so that's not the best answer. Or D, both men struggled to get Congress to support their reform plans. Also not true. They both struggled with the Supreme Court getting to support their programs, but as far as this, the government was really willing to address the problems in American society, okay? Very good. 24. What group of people adopted the motto, tune in, turn on, drop out, as part of a protest against social conformity? All right, now, tune in, turn on, and drop out. Those are the hippies. That's like the hippie phrase. And another word for hippies is members of the counterculture movement. All right. Now, members of the counterculture can include all of these, but this is going to be your best answer, and I'll just let you look at them, and I'll tell you that those are not the answers, okay? Members of the counterculture movement, all right? So I'm trying to throw in a wide variety of things here for you to think, all right? What is considered to be the greatest foreign policy achievement of Richard Nixon's administration, all right? Now, Nixon comes up with this policy of détente, and he also opened up, he went to visit China, so that's going to be your best answer there. So, visiting China and granting diplomatic recognition to the nation. All right, so let's take a look at these other wrong answers. B, escalating the president's war powers. This is Lyndon B. Johnson there. He was the one who issued the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. C, preventing an oil shortage by refusing to support Israel in a war with Arab nations. No, that's not it. Or D, preventing South Vietnam from falling to communism. That's not it either. So your answer on that one will be A. Okay? 26. This chart shows several incidents that took place in the 60s and 70s. So Tet Offensive, escalation of war in Vietnam, Kent State Massacre, and Watergate scandal. All right? What title best completes this chart? So what would fill in the best thing that completes this chart? All right, now, so your answer, I'll go ahead and tell you, is C. It's factors that led to public distrust of the government. All right, now let's look at why the other answers are wrong. Reasons for Richard Nixon's resignation, that's only going to be that one, so no. Effects of the War Powers Act in 1973. Watergate does not fall into that, so it's also no. This is all about Vietnam, by the way. Okay. And then the last one, D, events that increased support for the Vietnam War. If you remember the Tet Offensive, that decreased support for the Vietnam War. And also the Kent State Massacre. We didn't go over that in the PowerPoint, but basically that was a group of student protesters who were shot at and tear gassed by the National Guard. And this definitely decreased support for the Vietnam War, okay? All right, almost done. 1970s event. This headline reports on an event during the 1970s. It's talking about the 3 Mile Island nuclear disaster, okay? How was America's energy policy impacted by this headline? So after the 3 Mile Island disaster, basically the United States kind of stopped developing nuclear power plants. So it's going to be B. Fears of additional accidents led to a ban on the construction of new power plants. They stopped working on nuclear stuff for about 30 years after that, okay? So let's take a look. A, all nuclear power plants in the nation were shut down because they were too dangerous. That's not true. They didn't shut them all down. C, more power plants were built because of the need for inexpensive energy outweighed the risk. No, that's not true at all. Or D, nuclear power plants were moved from densely populated areas. No, they didn't move any nuclear power plants. But basically, after 3 Mile Island, the government became pretty paranoid about nuclear energy, so they kind of just stopped for a little bit. All right, the SALT Treaty, signed in the 70s, are evidence of what situation? So SALT, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, this means less nukes, essentially. Less nuclear bombs, less missiles, all that kind of stuff. So best answer on this one is B. The United States and Soviet Union wanted to improve Cold War relations because if you're having less nukes, you're going to have a better relationship, okay? So let's take a look why the other answers are wrong. A, the Vietnam War ended without communists gaining any territory. That's exactly the worst answer ever because the Vietnam War ended with communists gaining all the territory in Vietnam. C, the United Nations had the authority to limit the production of nuclear weapons. That's a decent answer, but it's not correct. D, the Soviet Union was committed to participating in humanitarian aid initiatives. The Soviet Union does not care about humanitarian aid. All right? 2 more. What is considered to be a major foreign policy of Jimmy Carter's administration? Now, you had to have watched my last video to understand who Jimmy Carter is and which one of these is the best answer. It's going to be C. All right? Now, if you were totally unsure, you could go back and look at the wrong answers. A, the diplomatic presidential visits to China. That's Nixon. Okay, so that's not going to be that one. B, the fall of the Berlin Wall. That is Reagan, or it actually might even be Bush Sr. It happens in 1989, so it's not Jimmy Carter. Or D, the withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Vietnam. That is also Nixon. Okay, so Carter is the Camp David Accords. He has this idea of having peace in the Middle East. It didn't work. He tried, you know. All right, last one. Which U.S. president supporting lowering taxes? Actually, I'm wrong. I thought there were only 30. Oh, Lord. How many are there? All right, only 36, so we're almost done. 30. Which U.S. president supported lowering taxes with the goal of decreasing unemployment and increasing investments? Now, we're talking about lowering taxes. We're talking about tax cuts for the wealthy. This is going to be Reaganomics. All right, Reaganomics, the trickle-down effect where you give tax cuts to the wealthy, they hire more people, they spend more money, and the economy booms. So that's very good. Ronald Reagan. That's the answer. You don't need to know the other ones. 31. What significant event in American history did Saddam Hussein's 1990 invasion of Kuwait spur? That's going to be the Gulf War. That's happened in 1990. Now let's go through the wrong answers. Cuban Missile Crisis is 1961. That's not right. Or excuse me, 1962. Bay of Pigs is 1961. So these are both Kennedy for both of these. Okay, and then the last one, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. That's actually not a real thing. They're talking about the SALT Treaty is what they're referencing there. So no, that's not real. So Gulf War. Okay, a few more. Sorry, I thought there were only 30, but you'll be all right. Which president focused on healthcare reform and balanced the budget? So you got kind of a trick here. You would think it would be Obama talking about healthcare reform, but the key word here is balancing the budget. And if you watch my last video, you'll know there's only one president who got close to balancing the budget. He reduced the national debt a little bit, and that is going to be Bill Clinton. Okay? All these others, especially this one, the debt went way up during their presidency. Okay? Moving right along. How have fears about terrorism impacted the United States during the 21st century? All right. Now, for this one, if you know about the Middle East, if you know about terrorism, we know that in the 21st century, the entire 21st century, at least since 2001, we have been in a war in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, okay? So, A, there's been a reduction in defense spending? No, absolutely not. There has been an increase in defense spending. B, there's been less controversy about the use of government surveillance programs. That's definitely wrong. They're talking about the Patriot Act, which is super controversial. Or D, there's been a decrease in support for immigration reform and restrictions. That has nothing to do with terrorism. Well, a little bit, but basically there's actually been more of an increase, more of a nativist attitude. If you recall, a few years ago, there was even a ban on some Middle Eastern immigrants, which is not good, but it is what it is. So 34, why is Sandra Day O'Connor, so this is straight up recall, significant to United States history? If you watched my last video, you'll know this one. She was the first female Supreme Court justice, okay? And the others are just wrong, all right? Couple more. In the 21st century, how has the world been impacted by the use of new technologies such as satellites, cell phones, computers, and the internet? All right, this is going to be your answer. People are more connected, okay? Now, as far as the wrong answers, people have become more isolated. The internet changed the game. It made everyone connected. B, people have embraced traditional values and customs. No, everybody's pretty progressive these days compared to the old ways. Or C, economic growth has slowed in countries where technology is used. Definitely not. Technology is a booming, big-time moneymaker, so that's definitely not, okay? And then lastly, under whose administration has healthcare legislation had the most success? Now, it is controversial, but what they're referencing here is Obamacare. And if you watch my last video, you would see it's all talking about Obamacare because he passed some of the biggest healthcare legislation in all of U.S. history. So there you go. Okay, so we went through that really quick. But hopefully you saw some tips, tricks, and hints in there. And if anything, maybe you learned some new content if you haven't watched some of my older videos. Guys, I ask I just really need you to try very hard on this assessment because they do look at these tests and they say, well, did Mr. Lewis teach during this year? And hopefully the answer is yes, because I did teach. Hopefully you learned some things. If you feel like you haven't learned anything, it may be time to go back and watch some of my old videos because I put in some time and some effort on those. So hopefully you got something out of this. Hopefully it was worthwhile. I'm sorry Sunday got canceled, but hey, now you can go live your life on Sunday and enjoy your time. Let me know if you want to schedule some type of Zoom conference or anything like that so you can have some more review time or some more help or anything like that. Make sure to study the study guides. Make sure to try really hard on the test on April 15th. And if you're not sure where to go for your testing room, you can email me and I'll let you know. But otherwise, guys, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.